In April 1985, corruption and racketeering ran rampant in New York City's construction industry. The mayor at the time, Edward Koch, urged Governor Mario Cuomo to appoint a special prosecutor. Instead, Governor Cuomo assigned the New York State Organized Crime Task Force to investigate. The governor stated, "We must break the back of corruption in the city's massive construction industry. Price fixing, job extortion, kickbacks, and organized crime infiltration and control of legitimate businesses cannot and will not be tolerated in the greatest city of the greatest state in America." On May 6, 1986, John O'Connor, a business agent and union official for the Carpenters Local 608, was picked up by the Organized Crime Task Force as he left his house in Brewster, New York. He was headed to his office in Manhattan. Instead, he was driven to the task force headquarters in White Plains, New York. At the time, he was being investigated for corruption, charges that he would later plead guilty to. What the task force failed to tell him, or rather warn him about, was that they had information he was being targeted by the Gambino family for an incident that took place 3 months earlier. Why he was never warned still remains a mystery. In February 1986, a downtown Manhattan restaurant at 301 South End Avenue, called Bankers and Brokers, was under construction. The restaurant was owned by Gambino member Philip Modica. The restaurant itself was a construction site and was visited by John O'Connor. O'Connor voiced his displeasure of non-union crews doing the work. He explained to the contractor they could go on with the work by paying him $5,000 or put union carpenters on the job. They paid O'Connor the $5,000. A while later, O'Connor came back to the site for another kickback. He demanded another $5,000, but this time his request was denied. As a result, late one night in February, O'Connor sent a crew of guys to trash the restaurant, causing $30,000 in damages. In what became known as the final report, compiled by the New York State Organized Crime Task Force for Governor Mario Cuomo, in reference to sabotage, it states as follows. In the construction industry, sabotage takes the form of the purposeful destruction of materials, fixtures, or structures. Examples include cutting electrical wires and cables and rendering plumbing inoperable. Such sabotage, known as trashing, is carried out by disaffected workers in order to punish a contractor or developer to discourage the contractor from dealing with a rival union or using non-union workers. It also can serve as a means for creating additional work. Naturally, Philip Modica reported the incident to John Gotti, who after the shooting death of Paul Castellano in December 1985, became the boss of the Gambino family. Prior to this, members of the Organized Crime Task Force picked the lock at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens, which belonged to Gotti. They installed 2 bugs. One turned out to be faulty, and the other recorded a year's worth of conversations. After learning about the incident at the restaurant, Gotti had a conversation with Gambino member Anthony Tony Lee Guerreri, where they discussed the culprit of the restaurant trashing, John O'Connor. The bug picked up the conversation. You think you could find out about John O'Connor? Well, I don't know if I'll find out tonight, John. Even if you find out by the weekend, you know? Yeah, what local is it? 608, John O'Connor. John O'Connor, 608 at 16-something Broadway. 1694, something like that. Carpenters. In other words, you want to see if, he's a business agent. To talk or somebody who could talk to him? No, we want to see who he's with. It turned out that O'Connor supposedly was with the West Side, the Genovese family. We're gonna bust them up. A subsequent meeting took place between Angelo Ruggiero and a member of the West Side, where it was discussed who was going to punish O'Connor for what happened at the restaurant. Tony Lee did put out a feeler on O'Connor, and according to one worker, O'Connor wasn't personally present the day Bankers and Brokers was trashed. It was mainly shop stewards from 608 who did the damage. But Gotti told Tony Lee, "I don't believe no shop stewards would take it upon themselves, no more than I believe my mother would go down on Ronald Reagan." Tony Lee had a business card that O'Connor left at Bankers and Brokers, and he used it while asking around about him. One person asked him why he was inquiring about O'Connor, and he told them, "We're going to put a rocket in his pocket." On the morning of May 7, 1986, at 6:40 a.m., John O'Connor was waiting for an elevator in the lobby of 1650 Broadway near 51st Street in Midtown Manhattan. A gunman approached him and shot him 4 times. Consequently, he was taken to St. Clair's Hospital, where he recovered from his injuries. On January 23, 1989, Gotti, Tony Lee, and Angelo Ruggiero were all arrested. Gotti was arrested at 5:40 p.m. while walking near Broadway and Spring Street in Manhattan. Ruggiero was arrested and arraigned at Beekman Hospital, where he was being treated for cancer. He ultimately would lose the battle against the cancer in December of that same year. The indictment charged them with conspiring with others to punish O'Connor for trashing the restaurant. The others referred to the Westies gang. Gotti, who was released on bail, made a prediction. 3-1, I beat this charge. The trial took place a year later in Manhattan Supreme Court in early 1990. John O'Connor, who refused to testify at the grand jury, was called as a witness. And he came with his attorney, who by no surprise was James LaRosa, a well-known criminal lawyer who represented members of the Gambino family. O'Connor testified about the morning of May 7, 1986. I felt some kind of feeling through my body. I didn't know what it was. I thought I heard thunder outside and felt another bump. Then I heard an individual say, "O'Connor, Mr. O'Connor." The individual was facing me with a gun, his arm outstretched. He said he slipped as he tried getting into the elevator. I had heard and felt a couple of more shots. When he finally managed to crawl into the elevator, he seen the gunman put something in a black bag and walk out of the lobby. When the prosecutor tried questioning O'Connor about the Mafia, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right. The prosecution called former Westies member James McElroy to testify. At the time, he was serving 60 years in federal prison for racketeering. According to McElroy, he met Gotti with Jimmy Coonan, the Westies boss, at the wake of Frankie DeCicco. DeCicco was the Gambino underboss, blown up in Brooklyn in April 1986 by the Genovese and Lucchese families. At the funeral parlor, he said they went into a small office. Coonan introduced him to Gotti. He claims Gotti asked Coonan, "Is this the kid?" When Coonan confirmed that it was, Gotti shook his hand and told him, "I'd like to take you out to dinner someday." After the wake, Coonan and he went to a restaurant in Soho, and Coonan supposedly told him that Gotti wanted somebody whacked. A subsequent meeting took place in a lower Manhattan restaurant with Angelo Ruggiero. According to McElroy, Ruggiero asked if they could handle it, and Coonan assured them that they would. McElroy testified that on the morning of the shooting, he met with fellow Westies, Kenny Shannon and Kevin Kelly, and then an associate of theirs, Joseph Slerrett. He said he waited with Kevin Kelly in the entrance of the building, and Slerrett shot O'Connor. He said O'Connor was spinning on the floor trying to get into the elevator. After a day of listening to McElroy testify, a reporter asked Gotti what he thought of McElroy. Gotti responded with one word: Neanderthal. In November 1987, former Westies member Francis Mickey Featherstone testified against Jimmy Coonan and other members at a federal racketeering trial. Coincidentally, McElroy was a defendant at that trial. The prosecutors in the Gotti case used a tape from a Rikers Island visit Featherstone had with Kevin Kelly and another person. Federal and state authorities placed 2 recording devices in the visiting room. These same tapes were used to convict Kevin Kelly for the O'Connor shooting in the federal case. The visit took place on May 16, 1986, a little over a week after O'Connor was shot. Kevin Kelly told Featherstone how Coonan and McElroy attended DeCicco's funeral, and they were told that O'Connor needed to be handled quick, and that they wanted him kneecapped. In actuality, O'Connor was only supposed to get a severe beating, but the Westies got carried away. Anyway, Kelly told Featherstone that Coonan volunteered their services, and according to Kelly, he told both Coonan and McElroy not to volunteer in the future. He also told Featherstone that O'Connor has a new asshole, and we did it for the greaseballs. Kevin Kelly and Kenny Shannon went on the lam after the shooting, but surrendered on August 15, 1988. Both were previously indicted with Coonan on the federal indictments, which, as I mentioned, one of those charges was attempted to murder O'Connor. Kenny Shannon, who's in this picture with my former co-defendant Michael Ligori in Greenhaven Correction Facility, pled guilty to RICO conspiracy in exchange for 20 years. Kevin Kelly, on the other hand, decided to go to trial, and after being convicted, received 50 years. But in June of 1993, he had his sentence adjusted to 40 years. Another witness the prosecutors called at the Gotti trial was a local 608 member, Ivar Mickelson, who also testified at the Westies federal trials and identified the shooter of O'Connor as Kevin Kelly. An eyewitness at the scene also told the police the shooter was a white male in his 30s, stocky build and medium height, wearing a blue baseball hat and windbreaker, which fit the description of Kevin Kelly. The witness also said the shooter had a Band-Aid taped near his left eye. The reason this is done is witnesses will concentrate on the Band-Aid instead of other distinguishable facial features. The Rikers Island tape corroborates McElroy's testimony about the DeCicco wake, but discredited his testimony that Slerrett was the shooter. The prosecution used the Bergen Hunt and Fish tapes, but the quality was poor and barely audible. In total, there were over 1,000 pages of transcripts from those recordings. On one tape, Gotti can be heard mumbling something about O'Connor. We're gonna bust him up. Near the end of the trial, a juror sent an anonymous note to the judge. I feel we have a juror who brought bias into this room. Please advise. This juror has indicated that he had some opinion of guilt or innocence before the trial started. Signed, a juror. Naturally, the judge called the jury in and spoke to them. The jury consisted of 9 men and 7 women, including the 4 alternate jurors, all who were sequestered for 3 weeks. On February 9, 1990, at 2:20 p.m., the judge announced that the jury had a verdict. After 3 days of deliberations, the jury acquitted both Gotti and Guerreri on all counts. After the verdicts were read, Gotti was overheard telling his lawyer, Bruce Cutler, "Nice job." It turns out the jury had issues with the tape recordings and McElroy's testimony. And just 1 week after the winning defense verdict, federal and state prosecutors met to strategize to indict John Gotti for the Castellano murder.